I've seen enough people say that women are easier to draw than men that I kind of started to do some self-reflection about a year ago. I'm in the opposite camp. I think that men are easier to draw than women, but my style is vastly different from the people who say that women are easier than men anyway, as far as drawing goes, so I didn't really think much of it at first. But then it got me wondering why my experience is so different from theirs. Because it's not like I think men are easy to draw, period. It's that women are so hard for me to draw that I actively avoid them sometimes. So by comparison, men are easy to draw, and the gap is so wide it takes me aback sometimes. So you can imagine when I see something like this, I'm gonna start thinking, even if it just boils down to a style difference. So, after some light contemplation and weighing some options, I've landed on an objective answer to my question, and not just, I'm attracted to men and not women, so of course it would be easier for me to draw men, because I like looking at them. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that that didn't have something to do with it, but again, the real answer is a little more objective. I've said this a few times, but it's an important bit of information. I never went to art school. The most education I got was one art class in 8th grade and a couple pointers from artistic family members when I was a kid. When I was about 14, I developed a certain way that I quickly sketch things out if I was bored. And I didn't sketch very much at all, maybe once or twice a year. But the way was, quite literally, scribble until it looks like something. It was lazy, but it so happens that organized scribbling was my favorite style to look at. I was always afraid to sketch human faces like this. I had drawn portraits, but it was always like an official event. I'd get all set up and try methods I saw other people using, but unless I traced every feature beforehand, I wasn't consistent in making it look like the person I was drawing. Maybe I should have been more patient, but I never thought I'd be able to get someone's likeness without really focusing for hours. So I stopped for about 8 years. I never tried to sketch a human face until recently. I mean, as I've been documenting for the past year, I've been working on charcoal. I kind of put pencil aside because I thought it was boring, or I thought that it would be boring. I didn't really try, except for like a few drawings here and there. But I made a last-minute demonstration for my last video in which I had to sketch Grace Ashcroft's face, and I had a hard time doing it. So I thought this might be a good example of how hard it is for me to draw a woman's face versus a man's. So I briefly mentioned it, and while I was editing the video, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna prove it. So it took me 30 minutes to set up a camera and to demonstrate it, kind of like I did several months ago in another video that I did. So topically, I chose to draw Leon, and my tool was a pencil, which was my old friend, and my method was scribble until it looks like something. Basically, I didn't think anything of it. It was just a quick, scrappy demonstration to show that I could make a man look like himself more easily than I could make a woman look like herself. So I was relaxed. I didn't think about any method. I did exactly what I would do as a bored kid. And after about 20 minutes, so then I realized, oh, this is what I should be doing. So I kept doing more. For years, I had my favorite aesthetic, but I had to find a way that I genuinely enjoyed achieving it, rather than just, because in order to enjoy doing what you're doing, as far as art goes or anything goes, anything where the process is what is enjoyable and not just the end product, you gotta enjoy the process and not just the end product. But it turns out that the answer to this question, how can I achieve that aesthetic in a way that I enjoyed? The answer to that question was my natural inclination, which is scribble. So what makes a man so much easier to scribble than a woman? It does have a lot to do with the method I developed, which isn't like set in stone, but it's consistent. I don't start with an oval or a circle. Believe me, I've tried. And I decided that even though I love looking at circles and curved lines, I hate making them. So I reside solely in the world of straight lines, no matter the subject or the medium. But I don't draw a cross either. I'll occasionally draw a long line if I absolutely need to know the angle of the head, but that's not very often. Even when I do it, it's a toss-up whether I'll remember it's even there. So I start at the brow line. I define the angle of both of the eyebrows, and then if the brow line casts a shadow on the eye sockets, which is 99% of the time, I scribble a light impression of where it should be. That creates a reference point and a little bit of depth, so I don't feel like I'm drawing a cartoon. I use the glabella to gauge the tip of the nose, and then if the face isn't pointed downward, I lightly define the shadow below the nose. If I haven't gotten distracted by other features at this point, I define the sides of the nose, which I use to gauge the corner of the mouth, and then the shadows of the bridge of the nose if they're visible. I'm always afraid to draw the mouth. It's always the hardest part. I always delay it. If I get it right, it will look like the person. If I get it wrong, even if it looks like a real mouth, it'll look like a stranger. In general, Sometimes I luck out. I start with a corner of the mouth or two, and then I find a delicate balance across the tightrope that is drawing a mouth, and I try to emphasize only the parts that absolutely need emphasizing, which is not easy to decide. And I try to do that with everything, defining only the parts that need it and leaving everything else alone. The whole time, I'm looking at edges of shadows in relation to the surrounding points, which means I bounce from one area to another pretty quickly. I might need to draw the edge of an eyebrow, or like the outer corner of an eyebrow, before I know where to put a corner of the mouth. Or maybe I need to draw the hairline before I can draw the corner of the mouth. It's a constant game of squinting and looking at every plane in relation to each other, on a small scale, on a large scale, until it all looks passable. And obviously, the more defined the points of reference, the easier it is to see the shape, and the easier it is for me to make it not look weird. So when it comes to deciding what to define and what to leave as an impression, it's easier if there's a lot of definition around the face, at least for the style that I go for, because then there aren't so many decisions to make. There are always soft edges and hard edges, but my favorite are disappearing edges. Look at this picture for a second. If you don't squint, you can see the edge of Leon's jacket on his face. You can also see the outline of the back of Grace's hair, even though the background and that part of her hair are both white. But if you squint, suddenly her hair merges with the background, and Leon's hair merges with his coat. So unless it's the focus of the picture, you don't have to define the separation between Leon's jacket and the side of his face. This also happens on smaller scales all around the face, especially the mouth. And I can go faster if I don't have to make those decisions on disappearing edges, which is partly why women are so hard to draw. Their features are generally very soft and men's are very defined. But it's not like I'm incapable of drawing soft features. And some women have very defined features, especially if the lighting's right. So why is it so hard to make a woman look not real per se, but to make her look like the woman I'm trying to draw? This picture shows exactly why. It's the eyes. It's all about the eyes, specifically the brow bone. The contrast in this picture is high enough on both their faces that any lighting difference doesn't really matter. I guarantee I'd still struggle with Grace. In this picture, her features are pretty clearly defined, and there's like a giant shadow on the right side of her face that I could use to gauge everything else. But is it that enough for me to get it as easily, if not more easily, than Leon? No. I might be satisfied with it after 2 or 3 hours, but not 30 minutes like it would for me with Leon. I should start with large shapes and shrink down to smaller ones. So if I have to start with the eyeballs instead of much larger eye socket shadows, I have a hard time. So why not use the large shape on the side of her face? For me, the easiest way to capture a likeness is to use the glabella to gauge the other features. So the more prominent a brow bone is, the easier my job is. Grace's brow bone is by no means prominent. I could still cast an eyeshadow socket, especially in this picture, but I have to be careful because it'd be hard for me to be subtle where I need to be subtle, at least until I'm further along, like in the surrounding areas. And hopefully by then, if I cross my fingers, hopefully her features are in the right place. If they're not, everything's off, I catch it too late, and I'm too spent to fix it all. So it may look human, but not the human. And I don't like erasing a lot anyways, so I try not to erase entire areas if I can help it. At that point, if her features are all off, then I'd probably start over. I tried to draw my sister, and I struggled a lot because she has the flattest brow bone in existence. The first attempt I abandoned. The second attempt I spent about an hour too long. And I know it looks fine, but the drawing as a whole, in my opinion, considering the other drawings that I've done, it looks a little scrappy. But my one consolation is that it looks like her. I even drew Markiplier's wife, Amy. She has some defined features, more than Mitzi, so would she be easier? No. 30 seconds ago, I said I don't like erasing entire areas, but guess what I did after the first attempt of this one? I had to start with her hairline instead of her brow line to gauge everything else. After the first day, I gave it up, but then I went back the next day and really liked it, so I finished and posted it. But this was never about whether I could draw a woman, period. It was just a question of why they're so much harder. I've drawn myself a few times, and my brow bone is non-existent, but it's a little more prominent than Mitzi's. My eye sockets have a little more shadow, but my eyes are big enough to make my life pretty difficult. My most recent self-portrait was with charcoal instead of pencil, and I didn't start on the brow bone. This was on a really lazy day. I was about half asleep when I did this, and so I was going purely off of instinct instead of trying to think, hey, where should I start? Like, what method do I use for this to make it easiest? Because that always makes everything harder anyway. So I started with the hair framing my face, and somehow that worked. And I don't know why. Maybe there's something to that. I don't know. So the shadows on Grace's face here in this particular picture are very dramatic, but since her brow bone is subtle, I would still have a hard time. Same with Mitzi, Amy, and myself. But on the other hand, I call it nature's sunglasses. Leon is an extreme, but a prime example of what I'm talking about and what makes my life easier. Everyone has a dip from their eyebrow to their cheekbone. I mean, it's the eye socket, so of course there would be a dip, but not a lot of people have them quite like Leon. You can always shine a light directly in his face, and I guess that would make light get through. But even then, if that's what his eyes look like with light directly in his face, imagine what natural lighting does. So I've never really struggled to draw him. Okay, that's a lie. I have a couple fails, but that's because I was using a fancy schmancy mechanical pencil I bought and I wasn't used to it. Kind of like when you have your own instrument that you've played for years and someone gives you a brand new one and expects you to play it the same way, but that's not how it works. It's kind of like buying a new pair of shoes and you have to wear into them. Or break them in, that's the phrase. It's like you have to start from square one if someone gives you a new instrument, because every instrument has a different weight or feeling, so you kind of have to warm up and get used to it and yada yada yada. And I'm sure, I mean, this particular pencil was a very heavy, the weight was a lot different than wood. It was very heavy, and so it was really hard for me to get areas to relax in order to get areas like as light as I wanted them to be and to be as subtle as I wanted to be. Anyway, I'm sure I'd get used to that mechanical pencil if I practiced, but I like wood pencils anyway, so it doesn't really matter to me. Besides that, the two fails that I have of Leon's face, if I draw from the eyebrows to the nose, around the face, and then the mouth, it works every time. And the same is the case with Cryos, aka John Keyes. He has absolutely zero space between his eyebrows and his eyeballs, unless you look up his nose. And even then, no light's getting in there. And so you can imagine what his face looks like in natural light. I don't know if his eyes are just deeply set, not sunken in, but like deeply set, or if his brow bone is prominent, or both. He's also a prime example of what I'm saying. So I drew him. His prominent brow bone, and also the shape of his nose, I will say, made it easier to get his likeness. Timothy Chalamet, same thing. But it's not like all guys have built-in visors so intense. So I tried to find a guy that would represent a softer brow bone, and Markiplier can. And it does actually take a little more thinking to draw his face because of that. But compared to Amy, so I wouldn't say his brow bone isn't prominent, just more rounded. And for someone like me, who hates drawing curved lines, it can be tricky. It's true that in certain settings, men can look like this and women can look like this. Especially if you're Jennifer Connelly, then your eyebrows cast a shadow pretty much all the time. But in natural lighting, even Jennifer Connelly's eyes don't come close to Leon or Timothy Chalamet. And the space between Gerard Butler's eyebrow and eyeball is still darker than his forehead. So lighting is always an important factor, which is partially why I thought the DLSS 5 thing was so ridiculous. If you don't know what that is, I don't really know much beyond the fact that it's basically a feature that uses AI to enhance the look of game characters, and it was advertised as being more realistic, but it's subjectively less so. It's the same reason I like disappearing edges so much. Human eyes can't see every crease and wrinkle unless they focus on it. In real life, details naturally blend together. Leon's right eye blends with the shadow of his hair. There's only a speck of a highlight on his left eye. There's no highlight on his glabella. There's not much light getting under his nose. The only highlighted part of his mouth is his bottom lip. The underside of his chin blends into the background, yada yada yada. Everything blends together, with the most defined and high contrasted areas being the highlight of his right cheek against his nose and the speck in his eye. That is how a human would naturally see him in that lighting, which is why it's so satisfying. It's about as photorealistic as you can get. The AI brings out random highlights and emphasizes everything, so you don't know where to look, and that makes it look unnatural. And the same is the case with this example of Grace. The flashlight she's holding casts some pretty intense shadows. Some pretty interesting and uncommon shadows. The brightest light source is coming from behind her head, so the brightest highlight is in the back. The darkest shadows are above her nose and on her right cheek. About 2/3 of her face is monotone because of that flashlight, and even the shadowed part of her neck is almost the same tone as the lightest part of her face. Her eyes barely have a glint because the flashlight is pointed away from her. The AI takes away that unique environment-specific ghostly lighting. It darkens the right side of her face, and it brings out unwarranted highlights in her eyes, on the left side of her nose, and above her lip, and it made her chin substantially darker than her Cupid's bow, when in the original image, they're the same tone. Again, It distributes the contrast everywhere, so you don't know where to focus. In real life, you wouldn't notice the color of her lips or the highlight in her eyes or how much light is bouncing off her teeth. You would see exactly what the developers made. More detail doesn't always mean more realistic. So with the eyes, Leon's eyes are technically in the exact same place, but the light the AI shines into his eye sockets makes him look like Sid the Sloth. It does the opposite with Grace. It darkens the shadows around her eyes, which wouldn't happen in that lighting. Anyway, speaking of tangents, I might have said that my attraction to men as opposed to women may have a tiny bit to do with the ease with which I draw them. And it's true, but it's the exact same answer as the real objective one. What I call nature's sunglasses, my sister calls a permanent under the eyebrow look. That's all I will say. So what's the solution? My current process works consistently with men, so I'm keeping it unless the lighting of a reference requires something else, but maybe I'll change it up when I draw women. My recent self-portrait was easier, and I started with the hair that framed my face instead of my eyebrows. With Amy, I started with her hairline. Maybe I could try that. With women, instead of the brow line, I'll do the hairline, or everything that frames the whole face first, working inwardly instead of outwardly. So, the answer to my question that nobody asked may have a lot to do with the process itself, or just how I examine faces, which I suppose varies from person to person. But the bottom line is that men are easier for me to draw because of their extremely prominent brow bones. That's my reasoning, but I'm still genuinely curious as to why drawing women is easier for so many people to the point where it's like a meme. Is it because of the style, process, preference, familiarity? Something subconscious? Have I been living under a rock? If anyone has an opinion, please explain in the comments. I might do another video about it if I find that I'm not actually tripping. So there you go.